everyone. I'm super excited. I think I say that every time I have an interview with someone, but honestly, this is really thrilling for me to have Derek Espinoza as a guest today on our interview of My Faith, My Journey. My name is Justin Miller, and I serve as a community liaison for the Arizona Interfaith Movement. Derek and I have gotten to know each other through the years. I think we'll get into that as we start going. But just so everyone's aware, if this is your first time listening, the Arizona Interfaith Movement is an organization that serves the whole community, and the objective is to help educate, encourage, and implement the golden rule as best we can, doing unto others as we'd have them do to us. And we try to do this through dialogue, through service, through connecting people of diverse faiths with other community members. And anyway, it's been a great blessing to be a part of this organization. But a highlight for me is meeting and getting to know people who are dear to my heart, like Derek. And so, Derek, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. I am overjoyed to be here.
Oh, you're awesome. You're awesome. So, Derek, just for a second, before I let you kind of introduce yourself a little bit more, I have a couple of questions I'm going to ask you to let us get to know you in a little kind of just a little enjoyable way here. Okay.
Okay.
So, if you had some time and you were going to go spend some time outdoors, would you rather go play golf with the buddies or go play football with the guys? What would you do?
Oh, football all day. I am a terrible golfer. Not that I enjoyed playing football in high school because I definitely didn't. But I have a background, so I can at least be, okay.
Yeah.
Golf is not my forte.
Not even just to ride in the cart, swing a little bit, and just chat. You'd rather go play some football, do something a little more active.
Yeah. For better or for worse, my ego can get the better of me when it comes to sports. So I'd rather participate in something that I can actually compete in. Don't get me wrong, I love a round of golf, but I play like once every 2 years, and
Yeah.
I'm usually just trying to keep up with the next worst person. So
Hey, well, then you'd be trying to keep up with me and you'd probably beat me. Okay, next question, Derek. If you had time to watch a movie, would it be a historical drama or a comedy?
oh, historical drama. I'm such a nerd.
I knew
I
that. I knew
literally
you were going
stay
to
up
say it
I stay up late at night watching historical documentaries most nights.
just
So
for
that's my
fun, just
vibe.
for fun.
Just for fun. Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to go for a run, are you running to a podcast or are you running to music?
Music. I cannot, I mean, I love podcasts. I listen to them quite a bit, usually while I'm washing dishes,
Okay,
or doing
okay.
something in the yard. But running, I need music. I need a tempo.
There you go. So something upbeat. You're not going for like Enya or for the white noise. You're going for something that has movement.
Yeah, I prefer lots of movement.
Okay.
Right now, it would be a new genre of either Christian or spiritual, like hip hop. So it's got the same
Cool.
kind of beats, but
Yeah,
the
yeah.
lyrics are just uplifting, inspiring, and edifying.
Nice.
So yeah.
I appreciate it. Okay, last question before you actually introduce yourself a little bit to us. You're taking your wonderful wife on a date. Are you choosing a fancy and delicious dinner, or are you guys going to do an outdoor activity somewhere?
Oh, we are so aligned on this topic. We are going outdoors.
Oh, okay. There's no, I
Yeah.
mean, maybe dinner at some point, but you'd much rather get outdoors and do something recreational, something, I mean, okay.
Yeah, there's for us there's no better way to commune with God than being in nature and just
Yeah.
witnessing his creation.
Yeah.
And I think for dinner the fanciest it gets on most date nights is like pita jungle. Like that's the fanciest. It's usually something like
Yeah.
Chipotle, and we'll
Yeah.
come home and hang out together. Yeah.
I appreciate that. Derek, I appreciate that. Well, why don't you take just a minute? Would you please like just share with us who you are? And maybe if we can just start out just briefly, where you were born, just a little bit about like who you were as a child, as a teenager. How would your friends describe you growing up? But maybe get into what is it that you do for work right now and why are you passionate about it? Now, and just for our listeners, this is kind of a unique episode because Derek has a great he has experience in doing a wide variety of things, and he has come to certain places in his career and in his education and profession. that he works with a lot of faith leaders. He works with a lot of people from a diverse groups of faith all around uh, uh, the United States. I mean, he has a lot of contact with people. And so while Derek isn't necessarily serving in a leadership capacity for a specific congregation, Derek does things with faith leaders and is involved in a way that's very unique. And this is such a great privilege. So, Derek, back to you. Tell us a little bit about you and what you do and why you're so passionate.
Yeah, yeah. So I think I'll start with who I am, what I do, and then I'll go back because it'll kind of fill that gap. I work for an organization called Somatic Breathwork, and essentially what we do is we train therapists, faith leaders, really anybody who works with humans to guide experiences that are breathing based that allow them to tap into deep-seated emotions, experiences that they might struggle to express themselves and give them an opportunity to release or let go of certain parts so that they can have clarity. Um, Part of our mission in somatic breath work is to help people come home to themselves, to kind of rid themselves of these patterns that we accumulate over a lifetime because of stressors, emotions that we haven't dealt with, and even traumatic experiences, and to provide them the opportunity to move past them so they can have more clarity, find more purpose, and really more connection in their lives. Um, Another thing that I think is important in the work that we do is it's rooted in, science-based practices. So nothing we're teaching is what a lot of my friends call woo-woo. We're talking about the nervous system, the brain chemistry, the physiology of the breath, and the, psychological benefits that we get from doing that. And so
Yeah,
it's been really
yeah.
incredible work. To your point, I have probably, in my role in that as an educator, have talked to thousands of people at this point from all over the world. Um, and for me, that's some of the most meaningful work because you get to see just the wide variety of people's experiences, highs and lows.
Mhm,
Um, and yeah, so we're on a mission to help people breathe more fully, to express
mhm.
themselves, and to deepen their connection with what's inside.
You know what's interesting is I think that sometimes we take for granted just our breath and like how we like if you think about before you go into something that's maybe a little bit nerve wracking, maybe the breath is like accelerated. And why is that? Well, there's some science behind why our brain's saying, hey, give me some more oxygen, pump some, like work some things through just for a minute. Or maybe if we're trying to calm down, what do we do? A deep breath. And why do we do that even with kids or with adults? Well, because it does something to us. It affects us. Like there's something just
Yeah,
about the basic element of breathing. And so not a new science, not a new thing, right? It's been
no.
around for as long as air and humans have ever had a relationship. But however, the implementation of what you've been doing, it seems like there's an increase of awareness in some of these just simple practices that people are picking up on. Is that right? Do you see that, or am I off in saying that there's a heightened awareness for groups and nonprofits and other leaders to tap into this?
No, I think you're right on the money. When you look at kind of the history of spiritual traditions, you see that breath is a component in almost every single one. Moments of quiet contemplation. If you look at prayers, and when people pray, a
Hmm.
lot of times their
Hmm.
breathing will synchronize and it'll follow a
Mm.
very slow pattern, which helps down regulate the nervous system and allow the mind to become more expansive. Um, in many faith traditions, the word for spirit and breath are synonymous, so they're interchangeable, which is really
Yeah.
fascinating. Um, yeah, it's just literally the coolest thing ever. And what we're doing is helping bring a modern approach to some of that. But the reality is after COVID, you can see like breath work as a search term on Google just skyrocket. So this moment
Wow.
where everybody's afraid to breathe, all of a sudden breath work begins to flourish. And so really around 2020 is when breath work started to become more mainstream. I would say that still today, it's not as mainstream as people in the field
Hmm.
would probably think it is, but it has
Yeah.
way more awareness than it did pre 2020.
Yeah. Well, I think that's wonderful, and seeing some of the work that you've done, you've certainly made an impact on a lot of people, a lot of people. And so, Derek, thank you for that. you take us back now just a little bit more in time?
Yeah.
How would your friends describe you as a teenager? What was Derek Espinoza like? Um, and again, we're not going to get too far into the faith journey just yet, but
Yeah.
how were you? How did you operate? What was growing up like for you? Just take a minute on that.
I grew up in Mesa, Arizona. I was a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was an avid Boy Scout. I played sports religiously, so I was always involved in some kind of physical activity. I would say that my friends probably described me as animated. I've always been a very intense and passionate person, so I would say that was
Yeah,
probably a defining thing. Um, I think the other thing as I look back over my life is I've always had a commitment to depth over surface level. And so I remember like, Boy Scout camping trips, I was always trying to hike next to or bunk with the person I could have the deepest conversations with, who we could
yeah,
really talk about, deep spirituality and really ponder on big ideas. And I would say that's probably another thing that my friends would have seen at that time where,
yeah.
most people are kind of one track minded. I was all over the place in my curiosity. Yeah.
Well, those are such incredible personality traits and just characteristics. I think it shows in you, it shows in your family. And honestly, this hunger for learning and for growing, applying, implementing. I mean, I'm not sure that there's better qualities out there to help someone really become. And so that's
Mm.
really impressive. That's awesome, Derek. I wanna just maybe ask a couple of questions. If you could take us down this journey. Obviously, you're passionate about helping people. You've been that way for a long time. You're passionate about helping people have the right tools, like you said, to come home, to kind of connect with who they are and to eliminate extra waste or whatever it might be, things that they're dealing with so that they can really kind of connect with God. And sometimes it's those very things that cause us to connect with God, that cause us to look towards Him and to work through something. And we need that, right? We need those obstacles. But would you just take us on this just for a minute? You're
Mhm.
also a spiritual person, right? You're not just passionate about
Yes.
the work and the development of innovation and growth and creativity, but I mean, connected to that is you're a spiritual guy. How would you describe yourself spiritually speaking?
Mhm. Radically spiritual.
And tell us more
Um,
about that. Tell us more about
yeah.
that.
For me, I think that I view spirituality as like the main operating system, and everything else is just floating underneath that. Um, I see myself as a spiritual being, humans as spiritual beings before we are material beings. And so for me, because of that, and the reason I use radical is like I'm more committed to my connection with God than I am committed to any one thing. And so that has led me to explore lots and lots of things. Not only spiritual traditions, but I got a degree in psychology. Part of that was pre-med, so I was really focused in biology, and it's just this constant exploration, and it's not exploration for exploration's sake, but for me, it's like how can I better fit to reality? How can I commune more
Yeah.
fully with God? And so, most of my professional life is in business,
Mhm.
but I still view that as a spiritual exercise. So it's like a test, like how much of my spiritual
Mhm.
beliefs do I allow to inform what I'm doing in business versus, I go to church on Sunday and then I show up in my business world and
Right.
everything breaks down after that. It's the opposite. It's like, how spiritual can I maintain myself even in places where spirituality is mostly, um,
Hmm.
not prioritized. And
Hmm.
so, and it's the same thing with my relationships. I'm sure my friends get irritated with me. But it's always this call back to, like what is your character saying? What is your soul saying? Like, is that the
Yeah.
highest truth? Or is that, kind of what we're doing here?
Uh-huh.
And so for me, yeah, I love God. Like that's it.
Derek, so please keep on that same train of thought.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, it's obvious that you cherish your relationship with God, and you've talked about that you believe that we're first spiritual beings before we are material. Why do you cherish that relationship? Because people will come to you and they'll see someone who's got character, someone who has a desire to understand and connect with people and help them. And behind that is someone who loves God. Why is that about you?
You know, growing up the way I did in the LDS faith, it gave me a really strong foundation. But part of the problem that, at least for me, was that because I grew up in that foundation that was so strong, it was almost like a fish swimming through water, not really realizing that you were in water.
Yeah,
And
take us on
so
this.
there
Yeah, tell
was
us about this.
yeah, yeah. So there was a moment right when I was graduating from high school where I guess like two really traumatic experiences took place. I lost one family member to a tragic death, a death of despair, and I
Mm,
almost lost another. And then, like right after that, maybe because of that, I had a spiritual crisis and I ended up completely walking away from spirituality and kind of went and had my what some would call a dark night of the soul, where I had to really find
mm,
myself.
yeah.
And, through that journey of self-discovery and reconnecting and finding my relationship with God again, what I realized was that relationship with God was the most important thing. Like I saw these initial instances as a way, I guess in my mind at that time was like, well, if God existed and loved these people, like how could this possibly happen? Like it just broke everything. But
Mm,
then through that transformation of myself, I just realized like, maybe I just didn't understand God. Maybe my frame of reference was too small for something that was way, way, way bigger. And as I implemented that, I just saw my life improve. I saw my own mental health
mm,
improve. And part of that exploration into mental health, I think you can only go so far without you butting up against God again, against
yeah,
spirituality again.
yeah,
Um, and that's where I think I just, I had to turn. I had to turn back.
mm,
And it was those moments, some of which were just really, really special to me, but it just gave me a renewed sense of purpose, a new sense of commitment, of, compassion for other people, like all these
yeah.
qualities that I think are just so important for not only us as individuals, but as, humanity as a whole. I found in that relationship with God.
Mm,
I was telling my oldest recently, I said, hey, you'll hear me say this a lot, but there is one thing that is more important than all things, and it's your relationship with God. And you don't need to let
mm,
anybody define that for you, but it is critical that
mm,
you develop it yourself. And that's what I see. It's like the foundation. If you're missing that piece, and it can look very different for all kinds of people, um, I've seen people struggle in that. And so finding that connection to me is like the most important thing. And that's why I'm so passionate about the work I do.
yeah,
Um, because in a way it does reconnect people. They might not use the word God, but you just
sure.
hear them talk and you're just like, yes. Yeah.
So Derek, you shared some extreme wisdom that seems like you learned in hindsight that maybe the way you were viewing things during some of these traumatic and very trying experiences, that maybe the way you were seeing it ruled out God and some of the elements of spirituality, and you had to take a step back and see differently. Well, well, in that spiritual journey, would you just tell us a little bit about what that looked like for you?
Yeah.
Post high school, what's it look like? And because today you're going to say that that's your number one thing, but yet for a time it might have been placed on the shelf, so to speak, or it might not have had the same priority. How did you come around to see? How did you learn what you learned, Derek? What's that story?
So I think first and foremost, the place that I got was, and I see a lot of people who leave organized religion go to this place where it becomes an all-out assault on organized religion. It's like my role now is to find every fact and figure that supports a worldview that is independent of not only religion, but spirituality in general. And so the first place that I went to was, history and science. And the funny thing is, if you study each of those topics long enough, you'll just circle right back around because, you realize the complexity of life. or you realize that there's these amazing moments in history that just like unfolded in a way that like couldn't be described any other way as divine.
Wow.
And so for me, the first piece was really just kind of historical understandings of religions and spirituality, and then psychology and science. Um,
Yeah.
I would say somewhere in that journey, I got really, really interested in what are called mystical experiences, or
Uh-huh.
experiences where, people get outside of themselves, and they describe it as these very spiritual experiences. And the reason why that stuck out to me and was probably a real turning point was because I started to see that there was commonalities in these religious experiences, and that they could be reliably produced, and that they had been scientifically studied and validated. And it just blew my mind that we have this capacity within us, regardless of our faith tradition, to have these moments where we experience something so much larger than ourselves. There's a term, it's escaping me, but it's basically seven dimensions of a mystical experience. Any religious
Mhm.
person or spiritual person should just go Google like the seven facets of mystical experiences. And what you'll find is when you connect with somebody who has a really deep spiritual connection, they've almost always experienced at least some of these seven.
Yeah.
Things like a feeling of being outside of oneself or outside of time during a spiritual experience, or a noetic quality where there's this like intuitive transfer of knowledge, an experience of merging with something larger. And we
Mm.
experience this all the time in smaller ways during what typically people call flow states. These
Okay.
states where we are so engaged and connected and wrapped up into what we're doing. Usually for me, it's a conversation like this. And to
Uh-huh.
me, that's God manifesting himself. Like it's just happening right there. You've just really stretched
Yeah.
reality in a really meaningful way. And so that started to really get me interested in things like meditation and prayer again, and kind of like this inner exploration. Because when you're looking at
Yeah.
science or you're looking at history, you're very much focused on the outside, the knowable, objective world. But once you start getting into these, inner experiences, that really
Yeah.
started to change. And so that led me to explore, I got really into Taoism. I got really into
Yeah.
Buddhism. I got really into Christianity again. I got really into Platonic philosophy. And you just start to notice it's like, wow, there's actually a ton of commonality between all of these things. And not only
Uh-huh.
is there commonality across these different spiritual traditions, but there's a lot of science that supports a lot of what they're talking about. And then
Hmm.
you look at society, because I'm really interested in, not having people suffer. That's kind of like my biggest mission. And you see
Right.
like these tenets and these truths all point in a particular direction of what it looks like to be a mentally healthy, productive individual. And it's like, how do we implement more of this stuff? How do we get more people
Yeah.
talking about these things?
Yeah.
So yeah, in a roundabout way, that's hopefully answers your question. But yeah, it was a bunch of different things for
Hmm.
sure.
So what were some of those defining moments that you had with people or moments that you had alone that caused you to say, my connection with God, or what I feel towards my devotion to
Mm,
God is going to become my quest?
yeah. On the people side, outside of those two early experiences that I kind of mentioned, um, I think one of the most important things was working with people in a diverse backgrounds.
Yeah.
And, I'd say one of my, gifts that I've received in this life is being a good listener, and really
Yeah.
like having a lot of presence with people. It drives my wife crazy, but if I'm with somebody, you're not going to get a hold of me. I'm not going to answer my phone. I'm not going to look at my text messages. So it might be hours
Uh-huh.
before you hear back. But that allows people to open up in a very particular way. And when you allow someone to open up and they get to talk about things that they may have never shared, I
Mhm.
remember I was working construction, and we would spend hours in the car driving. And these men that I
Yeah.
would work with, we'd have these experiences where they would get to open up. I would open up as well. And you just got to see like how hard some people's lives were.
Yeah.
The difficult experiences, the traumatic childhoods, the broken homes, drug addiction. And, for me, maybe it was because I had suffered enough myself to where I could really level
Mhm.
with that, but I never felt judgment. I just
Yeah.
wanted to understand. And so I would say that was probably, and that's a through line throughout my life is when you really
Yeah.
understand people and their experiences, especially in the darkest parts, you just can't help but turn back to God, like, and just have ultimate compassion for his children. So that would probably be number one. I'd say in terms of spiritual experiences, there's probably two that really stick out more than anything. One is you'll never regret solitude, like really isolating
Mm,
yourself and going inward. Because the more you do that, at first it feels foreign. Your mind's chaotic. There's all
sure.
these thoughts, and it's like, I never want to do that again. But the more that you do it like a muscle, you begin to strengthen that capacity. And eventually the noise in your head just gets really quiet. And then all of a sudden, this other space opens up where, maybe it's God, your higher
Yeah.
self, that's not for me to decide, but it feels like God.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And you get personal revelation. And you
Yeah.
and you can typically tell if you're being honest with yourself because it has a certain quality to it. And
Yeah.
the first time that happens to you, it can feel like you're just struck by lightning. It's just like, holy cow, I got to get my life in order, or holy cow, that's the decision I need to make. And so, developing that capacity to just allow yourself to get quiet enough to, open up
Mm,
and allow God to move through you, I'd say
yeah.
I've had many experiences like that. And you can do it in a variety of ways. Breath work is probably one of the most effective ways that I found for that, I would say.
Sure. Yeah.
And then the last is, maybe it's double, but nature. Like,
Hmm.
it's hard to deny the existence of God when you're on a mountain peak and you're watching the sun go down and it's just
Yeah.
like hitting you in every direction. Um, and so for me, spending time in nature has always been really magical. And I feel like, God has all of these secrets that are not
Yeah.
secret, that are woven into nature. And if you
Hmm.
just watch nature, you'll just
Hmm.
start to notice. And it's like, an easy one for people to wrap their minds around is, the storms of life will definitely come for you. There's no doubt about that. And if you're like the tree that's rigid, you're going to snap in the wind. But if you're the vibrant, deeply rooted tree that's alive, that sways, that can move with the storm of life, you're not going to get overturned. And it's funny because in religious sacred texts, there's
Yeah.
almost always stories that, use parables or connections
Oh,
to
for
nature.
sure.
So that's
Yes.
why I enjoyed that. Hopefully that
Oh, I
answered
love
your
that.
question.
Well, absolutely. As I heard you explain the connection with people and learning to listen and learn from them and see life through their eyes, you talked about how your compassion is heightened and your ability, or even deepened is probably a better way to say that, but your ability to feel for and want to help and want to come to the aid of somebody else when you know their story, when you know a little bit more about them, is just a wonderful thing. and then and then obviously how you connect the introspection, taking time, nature. And so Derek, I want you to try this. Here's maybe this could be a pretty hard question, but I wonder how you would answer this. Everywhere that you've come, like wherever this journey has taken you, and,
Mhm.
and and you're here now, what would you say are two or three core beliefs that you have regarding faith, regarding your personal belief of faith? Like what is it? You've
Hmm.
mentioned God several times. What do you believe about God? What do you believe about life? And maybe just two or three of those, because you've studied a lot. You've been around a lot of people. You've looked at a lot of different things, and you've just been on this journey that's been so exciting. And you can tell when you talk, but to people, that it's in you. It's in you. So what would you say? Two or three core beliefs that Derek Espinoza holds.
So before I answer that question fully,
Okay.
and it will help get to the question, one of the ways in which I found God and spirituality that I did not mention, and this is a testament to me being a totally fallible human, because it might have been one of the more important ones, is I had a child.
Yes, yes. You guys,
So,
okay, so go with that.
that was a huge turning point for me. When I had my first daughter, first of all, the experience of watching my wife give birth was transformational. Like there's almost no experience that I've had that was more spiritual than that moment. And then as I came to love this child, I realized that like, oh my gosh, this is how God must feel about me. Like there's nothing that this child could do that would make me not love them. There's nothing that this child could do that would make me not want to help them in every possible moment. The only thing that would prevent me and this child from having a relationship is the child deciding to walk away.
Mm.
And I just felt so deeply in my bones that that's how God felt about me and how God felt about everybody on this planet. So
Mm.
to come back to those deep spiritual truths that I have, come to hold dear for me. Number one is that there is a God, and people can describe that in a million different ways, depending
Yeah.
on what works for them. The universe, source, spirit, God, doesn't matter. We all came from the same one. So that's number one. Number two, God loves you like
Mm.
so much more fully than you could possibly wrap your mind around. And the love that you have for a child is a good indication of that, but it's even more than that. And
Wow.
there's nothing that any human being could do. The most horrible, despicable person that you know, God still loves that person.
Yeah.
And if God loves that person, then man, do I have a lot to learn.
Mm.
And then that probably brings me to number three, which is you should just try to the best of your abilities, and you'll never be perfect, to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Because again, if,
Yeah.
if God's not judging them, if God loves them,
Hmm.
who am I? You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and there's a lot of nuance to that last point, but
Sure. Sure.
the through line is that every single person that you encounter with is worthy in God's eyes. So, you know, you got to
Yeah.
wrestle with that. But
Yeah.
yeah, I
Sure.
would say, yeah. And maybe the fourth in that is like there's just so much value in understanding. Like if you want to know God, understand people more. Like
Mm.
it's just a way to understand God in a way that I think most people miss because we take our perspective and we kind of map that everywhere. But when you start to turn that and try to understand where someone else is coming from, it opens up your worldview in a really particular way.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and I mean, it's tough to know the unknowable, but it's definitely worth trying. Um,
Mm.
and I guess another one, I thought about this earlier today. This one's, I think, really important is, we live in a world of duality, hot and cold, male, female, light and dark. But the extremes are usually not like an indication that you're off track. Like I think that there's balance and harmony, and that's kind of the way to God, the middle way. And a perfect example of this is like you don't want to be the person who is so materialistic that all you're focused on is the material, right? Because we
Sure.
can all
Yeah.
imagine where
Yeah.
that goes. But you also
Hmm.
don't want to be the person who's so spiritual or self-righteous that you're
Right.
now judging everybody beneath you. It's this
Hmm.
middle path, and it's like,
Hmm.
I can't
Hmm.
describe it, and like that's another thing
Yeah.
with spiritual truths, I feel like, is once they're uttered, they've lost part of the essence. And so it's not a phrase or a term or like
Uh-huh.
a line. It's something that you have to and this is why sacred texts are so amazing, because
Yeah.
you embody them. And so depending on the situation, you
Yeah.
move to match the situation. All right. So the last piece that I think is important is, when you read sacred texts and you start to embody these principles, and the term that I like is virtue. It's something in like if you read the King James version of the Bible, it would be righteousness, but it's this idea of like how your character is structured. And so
Hmm.
when you embody virtue, you have strong character, you have good character. And for
Yeah.
me, that character allows you to connect more fully with God. And in my kind of model that I have, you know, God represents everything. Like reality itself is God. And so
Yeah.
the more I am connected to God, the more character I have, the stronger my character is, the better that
Hmm.
relationship is, and then the better reality is for me. And the easiest like example of this is, you can imagine people who have all the success
Uh-huh.
imaginable, but they might feel rotten inside versus
Yeah.
someone who is living in the worst possible circumstances that you could possibly imagine, and yet the core of their being is so light. And these are people that we idolize.
Yes.
Like I'm
Yeah.
sure multiple come to your mind. Um, but those are the like that's who I want to be. And I'm not going to be perfect, but I can strive every single day to have that level of character and then make
Mm.
note when I'm off track and then turn back
Sure.
again because that's the whole project of being a spiritual being. But that would be my thing is like life, especially your internal world. If you really
Yeah.
listen and pay attention, God will tell you you're on track or off track, and not in a mean and degrading way that's full of judgment and shame, but like, hey, I'm here and I want
Hmm.
you here too. And here are the things in your life that are not allowing you to be here. And so then, like the prodigal son, you just turn back and go, oh, shoot, off track again.
Yeah.
I'm going to sharpen up my character. I'm going to be more, virtuous in this particular way because I've fallen in that respect. So yeah,
It's interesting to hear you talk about the beliefs that create your core values, your core beliefs, how you define your faith. And it's hard just to say, I define it, and it's not a box. This is something that you said very well. This is what lives and breathes in you. This is what you have felt. This is even perhaps even it's what you've experienced. Going
yeah,
back to the birth of your daughter, the experience of love that you feel for her and that connection that's made in that moment of this must be how God feels about me and about everybody else, people who might despise him, yet he feels this love for them. And so it's so fascinating to see you share those things and to see you kind of just light up as you go through that. Derek, you mentioned, might have been, I think, your third thing that you mentioned about how you treat other people. As you know, in Arizona Interfaith, in the Arizona Interfaith movement, this organization, what we really are trying to do in many instances is to try to encourage one another to have dialogue and conversation, to serve together, to learn about one another, so that when people oppose us or things look a little bit tricky in communication or with if it's politics, if it's religion, if it's just neighbors, we can learn to live the golden rule and thereby have greater peace and harmony with those around us. And so I guess my question for you is it seems like you at some points in your life you have faced opposition from people close, from people afar, from people that maybe you felt got to know you pretty well, and people that are complete strangers. You've had opposition. You've had people tell you, Derek, you're off. Derek, you're wrong. Derek, this. Derek, that. Talk to us about how you feel today about approaching that someone who might be contentious, someone who might be opposing, persecuting, call it what you will, something that you hold dear, something that you really feel strongly about. How do you approach that now?
yeah. So first thing I'd like to say is there's different levels of opposition. And so that's important to just notate because there's certain levels of opposition where a lot of what I'm going to share doesn't make a ton of sense. Like if someone's actively trying to physically harm you, totally different thing. But in most cases, what I find is that most people are awesome, to be totally honest with you. Most people are great. I think that so much conflict arises because we invite the conflict in. And that would be the number
Mm,
one thing. Like if I'm a person of a particular faith or orientation, and then I'm going to someone else, and my frame of reference is I'm here to battle or debate or convince, like I just laid the foundation for what's going to happen. I told a friend recently because he's like, hey, I'm going to push back on that. And I said, hey, every time you say I'm going to push back on that, you're inviting debate into the conversation. Is that what
mm,
we want? And he's took a step back. He's like, no, actually, I'm not trying to debate you. It's like, okay. And I think it's just a good example of like how
mm,
we show up will dictate everything else. Now, to your point, early on in my life, because I kind of took this roundabout turn, a
Yeah.
lot of the views I had, or a lot of the things that I was exploring, were in direct opposition to most of what I grew up with. And so most
Yeah.
of the people who grew up the way that I grew up either looked at what I was doing or talking about, or actively told me, like, you're way off track.
Right.
And, I could have spent all my time trying to fight them. And I just realized, like, that was a losing cause. And so there was two things that I think were most important for me that I would give to anybody is, number one, it's on you to understand where they're coming from. Every individual has that
Mm.
call. So unless you fully understand where this person's coming from, it's probably not your turn to start sharing what you believe and sharing what you think, because you don't even know where
Mm.
they are. And so the first thing is, like, ask questions. Like, so much
Yeah.
of and this is a psychological principle as well. Like, in psychology, if you want to,
Yeah.
you know, um, be more persuasive on moral arguments, or anything like that, you don't just tell people, well, you shouldn't do that thing. You should ask more questions. You should get to a shared understanding, because when you ask questions and you do
Uh-huh.
so in a genuine place of understanding, it brings the guard down of the other person. And when our guards are down, our minds are open. When our guards are up, our minds are closed. It's how the brain naturally
Interesting.
functions.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I have to first get to that place where it feels like we're now in a moment of, shared meaning. I've asked
Hmm.
questions, they're asking questions. And then it's like there's a concept in Taoism called Wu Wei, where it's effortless action. It's almost like you're playing off your back foot instead of your front foot. And
Huh.
so you're feeling out the energy, and you're never pushing too hard. You're really being aware of how much range you have in the conversation. Because for me, like, the goal is not to convince you that you're wrong in this moment. The goal is to walk away and go, wow, we agreed on a ton of stuff. And that's the second piece, is stop looking for places of disagreement and start looking for places of overlap. Because
Huh.
once you've created a bridge of overlap, the differences become trivial, because we actually agree on most things. Like, that's the reason why I'm so passionate about the Arizona interfaith movement, because what I see is people coming together around shared beliefs. And when we
Yeah.
do that, we see that it's like, you're not evil. You might pray different than me. You
Yeah.
might call God by a different name, but you know what? I can see that you have a connection with God. And, like, that was one of my favorite parts about mine and your relationship, is there
Yeah.
was a moment where we're working out together, and we were exploring each
Uh-huh.
other, and just, like, having
Yeah.
exactly what I just described.
These
And there was a moment
conversations
where,
about all sorts of
yeah,
things, right? We were just asking, and it was really interesting to learn and to kind of hear perspectives that maybe you don't anticipate sitting and hearing and thinking through as deeply as you are at that moment.
yeah, yeah, yeah. One of my favorite terms is intellectual humility. And, like, I think that's something that our society is in need of tremendously, because it's like, Socrates, one of my favorite people, is like, the only thing I know is I know nothing. Like, when you walk into a conversation and you decide, like, I'm starting with just base, like, I'm here to know and explore, like, it just gives the other person so much freedom to express themselves. Um, the last thing I'll say, this is a concept from somatic breath work that I think is really helpful. We talk about these meta skills, and these meta skills allow people to open up in your presence. And the number one is your own internal alignment. So I have
Mm.
to, as an individual, get to a place where my inner alignment, or the state of my nervous system, is such that it invites people to open up and feel safe. And
Yeah.
everybody's experienced this. You've walked into a room and met
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
stranger, and you immediately either felt really comfortable around them or really uncomfortable around them. So, really regulating yourself, finding that inner peace, whatever you want to call
Hmm.
it,
Hmm.
reverence, like, that will allow people to open up. So, that's one. Number two is attunement. And this is where, now that I'm calm enough, I start to really see you as the individual. I start to
Yeah.
attune to your breathing pattern, attune to your energy. And
Yeah.
that helps people feel seen. Like, okay, not only is this person present with me, but they see me.
Hmm.
They're fully here. And then the
Yeah.
last is just the ability to hold space. Like, you don't have to say everything that comes into your head. You don't have to rebut against everything that feels wrong in the moment. Like, if you can just hold and just again, just be there for people. Like all of us are looking for that all the time. And when you do that for people, amazing things happen.
Mm,
And that's what a great, pastor or faith leader does. They're able to
mhm,
embody those principles in a way that allow members of their congregation to disclose the things that they literally can't tell anybody else and to be seen, heard, and understood in that moment.
mm,
And that heals. Like healing happens in the presence of an empathetic witness is something that we say all the time. And I
mm.
just, yeah, not perfect at it, would love to be better. But when we nail it, like it just is such a gift for people. And when we find it, it's a gift for ourselves.
I think I was literally thinking of the word gift when you talk about that ability of empathy, but also of someone's alignment, someone's ability to be still on the inside, and so they can be completely present with the person that they're talking with or that they're learning about, um, so that the individual can find help, answers, eventual healing, and whatever it might be. But I feel like that's a gift, the way you described it too. It's not just I think some people are maybe a little bit closer to some of those gifts naturally,
Mm,
maybe God-given abilities to, like you said, you have a gift of listening, and that's true about you. You've always embodied that, but you've also refined it, and you've gotten better at that.
oh, yeah.
And I think that we have the same opportunity as fellow sojourners in this life, to learn how to be empathetic, to learn how to be real listeners, to learn how to be someone who I can be there for you, to understand and to seek your well-being, and to ask questions, but to really understand for empathy's sake and for connection's sake, because there's a story that you have, there's a story that I have, and it does neither one of us good just to throw the story at the other one. Instead, we can learn about it and really grow. But
Yeah.
that gift, that just makes me think about that a lot in my own family. It makes me think about that as a husband and as a father in my church service and my work. Um, Derek, I think we have just time for a couple more questions, but are there
Can I add one
things
more
that
thing to this piece real quick?
would you please do, please do? And
Yeah,
I,
because
I,
I,
have,
I
I have
kind
a
of
question on that
mentioned,
same thing.
yeah, I mentioned something. So, I think that advice or perspective works for about 80% of the time. Like most of your life, if you show up in that way and you do those things, like things are going to turn out relatively well. But there are some times where you will face individuals who oppose just to oppose.
Yeah,
And then, maybe that's 10% or maybe it's 9%. And then there's a 1% who are truly malevolent people who intend to harm. Um, for that 9% where it's opposed to pose,
yeah.
I think there's a certain element of one having sure footing.
Hmm.
Like I've had moments in my life where I have been tested by an individual who
Hmm.
decides they want to lock horns and represent things that I really do not stand for. And there's nothing wrong with speaking up in those moments. It's actually what's required. Like passive
Yeah,
tolerance is not great, but active
yeah,
tolerance is. So, like, I can tolerate a lot of things and a lot of perspectives, but if you're going to hurt another person, something has to be said, something has to be done. Um,
yeah,
and doing so not from a place of self-righteousness, but from what I would call justice, like the ultimate goodness. Like, I can't allow
yeah.
you to hurt other people, and now I have to make a stand. But never becoming we're watching Batman Begins right now as a family. Total left field. I get it. But
That's not
there's
historical drama, Derek.
hey, modern myths, right? But what's beautiful is this line where, he's in this he's getting trained by this guy, Raz Al Ghul, and he's basically like, we're gonna go after the bad guys and we're gonna kill them. And he goes, wait a minute, doesn't that make us just as bad as them? And I thought, that's it. Like Batman is the perfect archetype for this particular principle where it's like you will have to fight injustice, but you should be super ruthless within your own self to make sure that I don't become that person. Because there's
Yes.
lots of people of faith who go out and they wave their banner of justice and then they become the persecutor. And that's like the
Yeah.
total inversion of the principle. So I would say when you meet tough opposition, that's where your character really matters
Yeah.
because you don't want to turn into the monster that you think you're fighting.
And that's a balance. That's a balance, isn't it? Because there's
Yeah.
going to be a natural part of us that's going to want to go beyond the line of control and of meekness and of temperance.
Yeah.
It's one thing I can stand up and I can have active tolerance, as you said. I can share, I can even correct, I can do something about a situation, but to not cross the line and now become the one who's the persecutor, or the one who's the whatever it might be, of I've lost my ability to have this internal peace, this alignment. I've lost that ability of reasoning the way I need to.
Yeah.
The gifts that I've been striving for now are pushed to the side, and here you get this carnal, this natural, like I'm just going to do whatever the instinct is, and that doesn't always go the right way. So yeah, I love the balance that you talk about, that there's a place to stand, but within reason of appropriate balance, to do the right thing, but not become the enemy that you've worked so hard not to be.
Yeah. The best place for people to practice this in their everyday life is with their partner and with their kids. Because,
Because
well, we've hopefully not everybody, but I will self-admit I have. You don't want to be the parent who's yelling at their kid to stop yelling. Like I just became the monster that I was trying to fight, right? Like, don't hit your sister.
yeah.
Now I'm going to spank you. It's like, what? Whoa, what's going on here? Like this doesn't make any
Yes.
sense. And so, and with your partner, same thing. It's like there's some times where your partner does things that you completely disagree with or that rub you the wrong way and irritate you. But now if you're the person that's yelling, like you just participated. And like for me, that's the microcosm of the macrocosm,
Ah,
you
well
know?
said. And
So,
it may be toughest, especially as
oh,
we're working so hard and so focused on them. It may be toughest with those we love the most. And that's
often.
part of,
Yeah.
often is, right? Yeah. Derek, that's really good. That's really good. Well, Derek, is there anything, as we kind of come to a close, is there anything that you'd like to just share with our listeners, um, that's just been on your mind, about anything? I just kind of want to open the mic and just say, is there anything that you've just been thinking about, pondering, that's just been kind of impressed on your soul for a little while, that you're just excited to share, just with those, to leave us with some last thoughts, some feelings, and some whatever it might be from you, Derek?
Yeah, there's two things. One is a thought experiment that I really love that I think if more people participated in, we would live in a better place. And then the second is some practical breathing advice that I think would benefit everybody. So
Perfect. Let's hear it.
um, the thought experiment is this. You get to create a society. So you have full dominion over how this society is constructed. But the catch is that you have no idea where you will end up in that society. So you might be the king or you
Hmm.
might be the president, but you also might be the homeless person. So there's a big gap there.
Hmm.
And the purpose of that thought experiment is to put yourself in other people's shoes and to think about
Yeah.
what would I want? Again, the golden rule, do unto others as, you would want done unto yourself. Um, I think when it's easy to say those words. And it's easy to just kind of like, surface level, but I'm not a surface level guy. It's really hard to go all the way to the bottom and to say, if I was the lowest person here, if I was the most disenfranchised, if I, you know, what would I want? What would help me? And I think once you start doing that, you just start to see things very differently. And so I would just challenge everybody, it's like,
Hmm.
yeah, just think from that perspective. And it might not fully change everything for you, but at least it'll give you more compassion, give you more understanding, which I think is really important. The last
That's
thing
wonderful.
is your breath. So just
Yes.
bear with me for a moment because I'm going to nerd out a little bit, but I think it's totally
Oh,
worth it.
yes.
So,
Please do, Derek. Please do.
we have these brains and we have our nervous system that wires throughout our entire body, and that controls so much of our bodily functioning. Now, our breath is something, it's one of the only, if not the only biological rhythm that we have full control over. So you can breathe unconsciously, but at any moment you can decide to change your breathing pattern.
Hmm.
Now, there's ways of breathing that will amp up the volume internally. So it'll basically create a stress response. And so the simplest, most effective way to do that is to breathe in and out through your mouth and to do so a bit more fully and rapidly. I'm going to change my sound settings here for a second. One moment. Okay. Tell me if you can hear me breathe. Okay.
Yep.
So if you just start to breathe like that, a little bit like hyperventilation, over a short period of time, you'll start to feel the stress response in your body activate. Now, that can be good for a couple different things. Number one, if I have really low energy, I'm really struggling to feel a sense of energy, maybe instead of grabbing that extra cup of caffeine or anything else, you just breathe like that for 30 breaths and you'll just notice your body is imbued with a new sense of energy.
Hmm.
You do it for long enough and you'll start to notice that emotions start to bubble up because the mind starts to get really quiet. Like the part of the brain that thinks begins to turn off and the emotional part starts to amplify. This is
Hmm.
also why, if you notice when you're angry or you're really upset, you kind of breathe like that. You breathe faster, you breathe,
Uh-huh.
and the mind closes down. So it's intentionally a purposeful tool to increase energy and activation in the body, but from the awareness perspective, really good to know because if you notice yourself breathing in that pattern and you don't necessarily want to be super amped up, well, then the second piece will be more helpful. So the
Okay.
opposite, where we breathe slowly in through the nose, if that's comfortable, and then a slow exhale sends a signal to the nervous system to relax.
Yeah.
Now, that can be really ideal if you're amped up and you need to kind of bring yourself back down to a place of internal regulation. If you're
Hmm.
trying to, become more contemplative, more open-minded, breathing in that pattern, the brain literally begins to open. That prefrontal cortex comes fully online. We have more of our mental faculties. If you're in a heated
Hmm.
conversation, this is probably the most important tool because you can just start breathing in through your nose, slow exhale, and you'll notice that internal pressure come down. If you're struggling to sleep at night, same exact thing. Um,
Wow.
and then the really big piece that you can connect to those two is really trusting the sensations that are taking place in your body. One of the things that I think gets misconstrued a lot is we talk a lot about the body, the natural man, like the negative impulses of the body. But
Hmm.
what I'd say is they're negative when they're unregulated. Like I have to eat. I
Yeah.
have to get resources. I would like to procreate and have children. So all of those things are really positive. It's when they're unhinged that they become unpositive. And
Right.
so when
Right.
we feel more fully and we use our breath to feel more fully, we actually get more capacity for those emotions, for those sensations, for those urges. And then we have more control over the response that we take. Part of what we're
Hmm.
doing in somatic breathwork is helping people go from reactive mode to responsive. Because if I can
Hmm.
respond rather than react, I'm usually going to make a better decision. So breathe,
That's
depending on
awesome.
what you need, change the breathing and just really feel into your body. And I promise amazing things will happen.
That's amazing. We are grateful that you said you were going to nerd out a little bit, but that was instructive. That was super helpful, and I think it's so simple that we can apply it consciously, thinking about what we might be needing or that what would help us best in a certain situation. And that, Derek, you just gave us a gem, so thank you. Well,
Ah,
well, everyone, this is going to kind of wrap up our interview. I just want to thank Derek again, and I hope to all of our listeners that we could hear some of the things that he said, all of the things that he said, and just to take into account the wisdom and and the impact that our personal lives, our personal way of being and living in connection with deity can have on others, and especially as we look at contentious or conflicting situations, that we have learned a little bit today on how to treat others right, how to treat them fairly, compassionately, empathetically, and hopefully that gift of listening and helping others find healing can be found in us. So, anyway, Derek, you've done a great job with so many people, and you've been just an incredible guest today. Thank you for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Hey, thank you. It was a pleasure to be here and happy to help support the work that you guys are doing.